Welcome everybody to this research briefing on Project T1P1 on research data management. My name's Deborah Bunker. I am the Chief Science Officer for NHRA and probably the main user, I guess, and sponsor of this project for NHRA. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from Gadigal country and would like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and also welcome any First Nations research colleagues who are online with us today. This session will also be recorded and it will be placed up on the NHRA website as well for anyone that misses the research briefing today. So really to start, again, welcome. We're really giving you a little bit of extra information on this project today and bringing everybody up to speed with information that is commonly known about the project. If we think about the origins of these sorts of projects and use of data and information by organisations, we really need to start to think about data management principles and indeed the Data Availability and Transparency Act of 2022, which was enacted in March 2022. So really this is about government driving this enablement of better government services. So increasing availability and use of Australian government data to inform better government services, policies and programs, as well as research and innovation. So this is really very important to an organisation like NHRA. Keeping data safe, of course, though, through education and regulation of data sharing and also supporting best practice. So this need for guidance, tools and consistent processes is really, again, something that is driving this project for us as well, and building trust and transparency. So this is sort of really being able to report on data sharing through public registers of accredited participants and data sharing agreements. And so this again is a driving principle behind NHRA's production and use of research data as well. Again, the Office of the National Data Commissioner really looks at this data inventory approach. So preparation of data, but then developing the data inventory itself. And again, these principles are really foundation for what we're doing here with this project. So this is, again, a driver of the approach that we're taking. The principles that we hold dear for research data management for NHRA are really the fair data principles, which of course ARDC also help with training, and it's part of their approach to data management as well. So making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and recoverable. Of course, we really also really want to incorporate care data principles though as well. So collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility and ethics, which is really also principles behind management of data coming from First Nations projects and First Nations people as well, but also more broadly across data management, and also data security, cybersecurity laws and regulations. Of course, that's been in the news lately with a lot of the sort of data breaches that have been happening. So really we need to take great care over cybersecurity and regulations, and also data privacy as well. So privacy laws and regulations, and indeed a lot of data that we collect and use can be quite sensitive. So understanding and applying those principles are also really something that we are trying to build into this project as well. And only exceptions on data exclusivity, and only for short periods of time. So we really see that data should be made freely available by those that hold it as quickly as possible. Number of reference project examples, and I'm sure you can also think of many other different reference projects as well. So national collaboration, research infrastructure strategy, so the INCRIS project, integrated marine observing system, integrated national air pollution and health data, Australian research data management frameworks as well. There are many others. So we also call out to reference projects examples, and indeed our association with ARDC and sponsorship of this project by them is also very important, that we stay apprised of those projects and also call on some of the lessons learned and the approaches that are being used there, and incorporate those into what we do in terms of managing data at NHRA. So we have a number of current projects which will really be quite important to this particular project, and those projects are the Australian Bushfire Data Catalogue, which is a desk-based review and cataloguing of available data sets. So that's currently underway. Also storing and sharing qualitative social data. So it's not just about how we develop a line of sight to quantitative data, but also qualitative data. So supporting the effective collection, use, curation and sharing where feasible of qualitative research data. And then also reconstruction bushfire data as well. So, using past data to reconstruct events and a greater understanding of those events. So this is a case study construction approach. But it's also important, and one of the guiding principles, of course, of NHRA research is that we are very end user driven. So this project needs to also be cognizant of that and develop the project using end user driven approaches. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that further. So this project, T1P1, Research Data Management. So it's the development of an end user driven data cataloguing approach, and also a pilot data exchange as well that can be scaled. The project approach has been developed in consultation with UTS, CSIRO, University of Sydney and ARDC. Really there are a number of important principles that have emerged as we have been developing this approach. And indeed, if we think about some of these things, which are really quite important requirements from NHRA's point of view, is that we will be convening a user requirements group, and this will be very important to the project, and that is outlined in the RFT. So where we will be consulting with end user representatives, also technical project team members, where we will really need to think about ecosystem information architecture. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the type of architecture we are thinking that will be central to the creation of this exchange. Australian Bushfire Data Catalogue Research Team member, so that's the University of Sydney led project, which was listed before on the previous slide. A storing and sharing qualitative data social data research team member. It was currently in EOI evaluation process, but that team is now up and running. An AFAC team member, a user representatives, of course, and then ARDC suggested team members as well. And indeed, keeping a line of sight to the projects that are going on that have been sponsored by ARDC, and how, again, some of the learnings from those projects can be incorporated into this project is also very important to keep in mind. The benefits are that this is a smaller scale project. We have a few NHRA projects, or fewer projects up and running within NHRA at the moment to develop and test the cataloguing approach. So we have this small number of projects currently that we can use as use cases, and NHRA projects have data agreements in place. So we start from a place where we already have some agreement in place with these projects. So some considerations and I guess opportunities for this particular project as well from where we sit is locating and identifying data held by third parties but currently not controlled by NHRA, where there are no data agreements in place. Who has what and what will they share? What records do we have? What records do we need to find out about? Now, the Bushfire Data Cataloguing project that I mentioned before is developing some of these materials. So it's very important that this project interfaces with that project, because that will, they're really doing the mapping of where bushfire data currently sits and who holds it. So it's important that that interface is certainly developed between both this project and that project as well. There's contextual issues that we need to consider. Research data, qualitative or quantitative, how has it been indexed or classified to date? input to operational systems or current doctrine. So is it jurisdictional or organisational constraints around it? So are there some limitations to, so while we might develop a line of sight through this metadata exchange to various data holdings, there may be constraints around making that data available, but at least if people know it's there, then and also know what those constraints are, there is a level of awareness, at least, that there is data there that can be accessed, or maybe accessed under limited characteristics of some sort. Also cultural privacy sensitivities, and I'm sorry the lights have just gone out here, so I'm going to have to wave my arm around to get them back on again. So cultural privacy sensitivities. So there could be, for instance, we are doing a lot of First Nations projects, for instance, so there could be data permissions and accessibility that might be quite different to other types of projects that we need to consider as well. There's also the architecture that we're really sort of thinking that this project will be centred around, which is this digital ecosystem architecture, so digital information exchange model. So updating, changing and deleting data, so data aging aspects that need to be considered. Storage rules and policies, they could be different in each location for each type of data set. Cultural and privacy sensitivities. So again, things like First Nations data permissions and accessibility could be if it's a bit more health related, or it could be data that might be exposing people who are a bit more vulnerable, for instance. So we need to think about those things. Who owns and manages the data as well. So the coordination and administration of the data at a local level, and who pays for the ongoing maintenance of the data as well. So again, these are things that need to be considered within the scope of this project. So when we talk about digital ecosystems and this digital information exchange architecture, this is really what we mean. So we have information holders or providers and information consumers or the information audience. So really connecting, searching, so requesting and receiving. The information holders would connect, source, consolidate and share data. And then the exchange itself would have coordinator and also an administrator with digital identity and access management between the consumers and the providers, of course. And then really I guess the central technical part to this exchange would be secure digital information exchange platforms. So we need to think about the metadata and information sources, but also APIs and services. And we would also indeed think about architecting this exchange in a way that would allow for, I guess, automatic data exchange between providers and consumers, or maybe not automatic, but certainly automated exchange between providers and consumers, so once found, the data could be organised to be piped straight through to consumers, for instance. So this notion of APIs and services, what do they look like? Cache and parallel processing and information gateways and pipelines. So really thinking about the overall technical architecture of the exchange platform. So really see it's sort of working in this manner, and then really thinking about all those things which underpin the control of the exchange. So accounts and subscriptions, auditing and monitoring what's going on in the exchange, help and support, governance and compliance, and security and privacy. So really hearkening back to those principles that we really consider that need to be inbuilt to this digital information exchange. The structure that we're thinking here in terms of the overall structure of the exchange, which really is hearkening back to the previous diagram, is so the provider share information outbound, including allowable privileges and conditions with the intended audience, so the consumer, enabled via connect, source, consolidate and shared services. So it really is a service-driven architecture. An information audience, the consumer accesses available information, including allowable privileges, conditions, via connect, search, request and information received services. and the consumer's use of the inbound information is controlled by the allowable privileges and conditions set by the sharer. So again, this is, while we are creating a metadata exchange, it is really the control of the information is at the local level. And while end users can request information, it will be governed by the control settings, I guess, of the holder of the data. So this exchange really, it's not about, we don't want to hold data sets. We really want to develop a line of sight to data sets using metadata characteristics to allow that line of sight to let the consumers of the data understand what types of data is there and under what conditions they may be able to access it. The information sharing is overseen and facilitated by the Information Exchange Coordinator via governance and compliance services. So there would be a coordinating steward, of course, of all of that. And an Information Exchange Administrator manages the exchange operations using core operational and business support services. So digital identities and access management, audit and monitoring, account and subscription, help and support, and security and privacy. So there are control mechanisms in the exchange itself. With such a data catalogue, we're really sort of thinking about the types of outcomes we may be able to facilitate through having this type of exchange and ability and development of a line of sight from consumers of information to providers. So really, things like reanalysis of data for new further model algorithm testing and validation. If people actually understand the data's there, they might be able to do reanalysis, could do perhaps additional analysis to highlight wider or deeper findings within the data set, so perhaps new insights, or recombination with additional data. So it could be, there could be some quant data there, maybe you add some additional interviews to triangulate existing data sets, or additional quantitative data sets to shed light on existing interviews. So they're just a few very high level examples, but noting understanding original research context of data collection is essential, and research protocol access should also be given with data set access. So really it's not just about the data holding itself, it's also about understanding and mapping the protocols which accompany the data holdings. So I think it's very important here to I guess, and this is an area that I particularly want whoever provides this, whoever will provide us with this project to understand that, of course, data is contextual, and so understanding the research protocols around data set creation is as important, I think, as the data itself. So it's really developing that line of sight, not just to the data holdings, but also to be able to describe the protocols in some way that's around the data holding. So next slide, please. So just an example use case, for instance, third parties currently developing an AI-driven system to bushfire perimeter prediction planning, so management. The system interrogates a digital twin or a spatial layered model of the environment, will provide decision support for fire managers and responders to more effectively understand the environment in which they're operating, implications of decisions that may arise. So an effective data catalogue will allow this third party, or should allow this third party, to locate and access existing data sets, which will shorten their development time, hopefully. So this will save development costs and make the system cheaper to deliver, and ensure that the digital twin is supplemented with as much data as possible, representing realistic model variability. So as you can see, this is really, I guess, what we are aiming for is the ability to be able to get some of these economies and allow for to stem replication of data gathering, for instance, to be able to allow people to understand what data is out there already, what are the characteristics of that data, how old is it, does it need refreshing, do they need to actually gather additional data, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, we're really trying to abide by those principles that I discussed with you in the first few slides of this presentation, and bring them through to the creation of this metadata exchange to develop a line of sight to relevant holdings. Initially in the bushfire space, But I think also within the RFT, we're also specifying that this type of exchange approach should be useful for all natural hazards data. So that's also something to keep in mind as well in terms of the architecture of this pilot exchange. So if we think about the data set descriptions, for instance, and these are, again, just some very high-level examples and not necessarily all applicable to what we're doing here. But, you know, if we think about, you know, a metadata description of a data set, you know, hazard type, general data set description is an objective, qualitative, quantitative, text, numeric, or text and numeric. Aging characteristics, is it only current as a certain date or current till a certain date? So is it historical or longitudinal? File type, pardon me, file version to indicate software version, file size, collection dates, locations, access contact, access available. Is it a full data set, summary data set, not accessible? Usage, reanalysis, additional analysis, recombination, or any other combination. So again, this is really just to give you an example of the sorts of things that we would be looking to include in as descriptors. But again, this will, as the project emerges, of course, this will be user driven. So there will be things that the end user will require that we may not have even thought about to date. So next slide, thank you. In terms of protocols, research protocol description. So the protocol type is a survey, experiments, interviews, workshops, secondary sources, again, descriptions, the context of the data collection, the country, the jurisdiction, instrumentation origin, is it reuse, modified, or extension, file types, locations, organisation, website, repository, public or private, and again, the access, contact, and available, or protocols, selected protocols, not accessible. And that's really to allow, so the protocols and the data to be accessed together in order to be able to interpret the data, of course, if the data is used by another party in some way, that it's used in context. So our next steps are to identify, assemble and brief a technical project team, as this team will include members of all other NHRA data projects. These projects will work together to develop sound, effective and successful development approach to the digital ecosystem. And this will be applied to other data projects, right? So this is really the first step in then being able to, as other projects emerge within the NHRA portfolio, to start to incorporate their data holdings into the data exchange. So we will develop a detailed project plan with milestones with whoever wins this bid, identify, assemble and brief user requirements group. Again, this is specified within the RFT. Create a schedule of user and technical team meetings, project execution, and then deliver the NHRA data catalogue towards the end of this year. So that's really what I have to share with you. This is really information that is made available to everybody, so everybody's working from the same basis of information, and information that has been shared with our colleagues from UTS, USED, ARDC and CSIRO. So everybody is really responding to this RFT from the same information base. I have a question in the Q&A. The slides will be available for download. Well, I think the briefing today will be up on the website, so you'll be able to access that to go back over the information I provided. How hands-on or hands-off do NHRA intend to be during the project? Are you looking for a complete project quote to include all the work detailed here? We're really looking for a a response to the RFT to deliver both the exchange and the data approach to building the exchange. So it's really to deliver that the pilot exchange, partly also to think about how you will work with our other data projects as well. A lot of the mapping of data holdings, bushfire data holdings, will be being done by the associated project. So we're really looking for you to deliver what we've asked within the RFT, which is the delivery of the pilot exchange and the data framework. And will you distribute the proposed contract for the project? The contract should be available with the RFT on the website if it hasn't been distributed to the list. Again, that will be available, that is available on our website. And what's the breakdown between stage 1 and stage 2 timelines expected? Again, they will occur concurrently, so it's really up to you to specify how you see those stages working together. So I see they're both concurrent stages. So the actual, the framework and the exchange development, technical exchange development, would be working in concert, and they would be reliant on each other, really. And what is your thinking about the ongoing costs to operate the data exchange? Again, we're asking you if you're when you are developing the pilot project, part of the delivery or the deliverables for the pilot project would be a budget moving forward for the scaling and ongoing operation of the data exchange. So again, we would be calling on your expertise and your understanding as you create the pilot on what the cost would be to scale that and to operate it in an ongoing fashion. So we're really calling on your expertise to provide that to us as one of the deliverables of this project. What data sets, resources will be provided for the project? What's the scope, as we're assuming there will be a finite number of data sources included? So as I say, the associated data cataloguing project, which is being run by University of Sydney and other partners, is actually doing an exercise of locating where data sets are residing, bushfire data sets that is. And so you will have access to that project and the work that they're doing. You will also have access to current NHRA projects in the bushfire area that will be made provided for the project as well. And again, it will just depend on, in terms of use case development and what have you, just what we can do in the time provided. So we'll be looking for some, we'll be dealing with that, I guess, in project. But there's certainly a lot of data sets and resources that will be provided to the project to be able to use those as the basis of use cases, and then also work with our end users to develop the exchange in a way that will be useful for them. So you'll have a number of different sources of data and information that you can work with on the project. And would the provider be using an existing platform for hosting the exchange, or would the provider need to provide that IT software development expertise? We're really looking for this to be end user driven. So while it could be something that is existing that could be tailored for use, it would really need to be quite flexible to be able to accommodate our end users, I guess, and the use cases that need to be incorporated. So I guess that's also something to think about for those of you that are thinking of responding to the RFT, is that perhaps there could be something that could be reused, but it needs to be able to accommodate our end user driven approach to this. So it needs to be flexible enough to be tailored. Will the portal deliverable be pilot, or is the expectation that the deliverable is productionizable sorry, at the end of stage 2? We would expect that it would be able to be scaled. So it needs to be something that's fully functional. Once built, does NHRA plan to resell the data exchange, or will this be an open source platform? I think we would be considering this to be open source, but again, we would need to have further discussions on that. And again, I guess it will depend on the approach that the respondent to the RFT takes, especially if there is some proprietary software that would be used within the solution, for instance. So this would need to be something that would need to be sorted in the context of the project itself. In terms of the user-driven expectation, is the expectation that end users will be able to add new data elements in real time? At this stage, I would say no to that. Again, this is why the end user-driven developing the data exchange in conjunction with a high element of end user participation is critical. So we would expect that this would be much more, the end user driven side of things would be incorporated into the architecture at a reasonably early stage, or while the architecture, the building of the system is in process, rather than adding elements along the way. That is really, I guess, my view at the moment. So I guess that's all I can really say on that. So it's really capturing those end user elements within the project as the exchange is being constructed. Yes, I think so. Metadata exchanges, should metadata exchanges be ISO compatible? Yes, that would be my answer to that. But again, we're looking for the technical expertise within the project as well. So, we're looking specifically at respondents who can deliver the technical architecture at the end of the day. But yes, being ISO compliant is obviously desirable. What is your view on focus engagement and framework development versus the actual implementation of the platform itself? Well, I think the engagement and framework development is very important, because the critical aspects of the development of line of sight, but also of management of the metadata in an effective way is really critical. So capturing that engagement and developing developing the governance around the system is really very critical. And so the actual implementation, as I say, we would expect that the implementation of the platform will be scalable at the end of the day, and that you would be able to provide guidance on, the cost to scale. So what would be the appropriate way to scale the platform, and also what you would feel that the ongoing operations. And indeed, look, there would be more data to be catalogued, for instance, as well. We would only see this project is really going to try and cast as widely as possible use cases to try and capture all of those end user requirements, or as much as possible. But again, this will be to a functioning pilot that is scalable. But of course, there could be additional development work, for instance, in doing that, right? So we need to be realistic. Can we leverage the learnings or user feedback from current data catalogues? Yes, that are available to explorers. Their preferred systems already successful that could be used as a benchmark, or are you wanting to approach this with fresh eyes, reinvent the wheel? Look, I think that drawing on other projects, and I think I mentioned that before in the presentation, can be quite useful. But remembering that we don't really want to be holding any data. We really just want to be developing a line of sight to data holdings in the most effective way possible, and that will be ultimately useful to the end users, or to people that may want to either explore or understand what data is out there. So yes, you could draw on learnings from other data cataloging approaches. That's no problem with that. keeping an open mind, of course, that there could be other things that are discovered as this project starts to gain a head of steam as well, that may not necessarily have been dealt with in other approaches. Okay, well, we might draw the session to a close if there are no other questions at the moment. And of course, our research services team are always available to take questions, and any additional questions that we get or we happen to get from people, we will actually pop those up on the website. And so everybody will have any additional information that we provide on the project. So we really want to make sure that everybody has a common information base from which to work. So please, if there are any additional questions, we have just Q&As. Has the idea for this project been driven from NHRA or from external federal agencies such as NEMA? Now, the idea for this project is actually has actually been driven from us, and also is of course sponsored by ARDC. But yeah, it's certainly really. In a way, we don't want to, so NHRA really we have no desire to hold data ourselves. We really just want to facilitate access to data that is out there from previous bushfire and natural hazards CRC if possible, but certainly from NHRA data holdings moving forward. And then, this may well be useful to be scaled to a wider use. But certainly from an NHRA perspective, we really want to be able to just develop a line of sight to the research data that we hold and make that useful for anybody that might want to locate it and use it. ARDC is sponsoring this project along with NHRA. And we will actually be working quite closely with them to understand what's happening in their other projects and any learnings that we can glean from those projects, as well as access to anything from the other projects that may prove useful for this project as well. So we will be happy to facilitate that activity and those connections to ARDC for whoever is a successful tenderer for this particular project as well. So we're really looking to get an overall guidance from a number of our different partners and sponsors to make this as useful as possible, but also then ensure that the end users of the data have their say as to the best way to actually, or how they see the most useful understanding of line of sight and the facilitation of access to data as well. So we're sort of really doing a couple of things at once with the project. And as I say, if you think of anything that you wish to ask that you haven't thought about in this session, especially I know when you're putting together a response for a tender, sometimes you go, oh, gee, I wish I had have asked that question. It would be useful to have that information. Please feel free to consult with, so you can send your questions to our research services team. The link is in the RFT. And as I say, anything that we respond to will be placed up on the website as well, so everybody will have access to the same information, so whatever information is given out. But please feel free to contact us if you need any additional information while you're framing your responses to the request for tender. Okay, I think we'll finish there if there is no other questions. And thank you very much for your attendance today. And we look forward to seeing the various bids to see what you come up with. So thank you very much.